It all started with a simple family dinner. A young woman, recently married, was excited to spend time with her in-laws. She had always gotten along well with them, and they seemed to genuinely care for her. But something strange began to happen every time she ate at their house. She would feel unwell, sometimes dizzy, sometimes nauseous, and other times just overwhelmingly tired. At first, she brushed it off as coincidence or maybe stress. But as the pattern continued, she couldn't ignore it anymore. The first time it happened, she thought it was just a bad day. She had been working long hours, and her body was probably just exhausted. After dinner, she felt a little lightheaded, but she didn't think much of it. Her mother-in-law had prepared a delicious meal, and everyone seemed to enjoy it. She went home, slept it off, and woke up feeling fine the next day. But then it happened again. The next time she visited her in-laws for dinner, the same thing occurred. This time, the symptoms were worse. She felt a sharp pain in her stomach, and her head was spinning. She tried to hide it, not wanting to cause any drama, but her husband noticed. He asked if she was okay, and she assured him it was nothing. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The third time was the breaking point. She had barely finished her meal when she felt a wave of nausea hit her. She excused herself and rushed to the bathroom, where she spent the next hour feeling miserable. Her husband was worried and insisted they leave early. On the way home, she couldn't stop thinking about what was happening. Why did she feel so sick every time she ate at her in-laws' house? Was it something in the food? Was it all in her head? She decided to pay closer attention the next time. She watched as her mother-in-law prepared the meal, trying to see if there was anything unusual. But everything seemed normal. The ingredients were fresh, the kitchen was clean, and the food smelled amazing. She even offered to help, hoping to get a closer look, but her mother-in-law insisted she relax and enjoy herself. When they sat down to eat, she took small bites, trying to see if she could pinpoint what was making her feel sick. But the symptoms came back, just as they had before. This time, she couldn't hide it. She felt so weak that she had to lie down on the couch. Her husband was visibly concerned, and her in-laws looked worried too. They suggested she see a doctor, and she agreed. The next day, she made an appointment with her doctor. She explained everything, how she only felt sick after eating at her in-laws' house, how the symptoms were getting worse, and how she couldn't figure out what was causing it. The doctor ran some tests but couldn't find anything wrong. He suggested it might be stress or anxiety and recommended she take it easy. But she wasn't convinced. She knew her body, and she knew something wasn't right. She decided to take matters into her own hands. The next time she visited her in-laws, she brought her own food. She made an excuse, saying she was on a special diet, and her in-laws didn't question it. To her surprise, she felt fine that evening. No dizziness, no nausea, no pain. It was the first time in weeks she had felt normal after a visit. This confirmed her suspicions, it was something in the food. But what? She couldn't imagine her in-laws would intentionally do anything to harm her. They had always been kind and welcoming. She didn't want to accuse them of anything, but she needed answers. She decided to talk to her husband about it. That night, she sat him down and explained everything. She told him about the pattern, the symptoms, and how she felt fine when she brought her own food. At first, he seemed skeptical. He couldn't believe his parents would do anything to hurt her. But he also knew she wasn't the type to make things up. He agreed to help her figure out what was going on. Together, they came up with a plan. The next time they visited his parents, they would both bring their own food. They would make it seem like they were trying out a new diet together. That way, no one would suspect anything. If she felt fine again, they would know for sure it was something in the food. And if she didn't, well, they would cross that bridge when they got to it. The day of the visit arrived, and they put their plan into action. They brought their own meals, and her in-laws didn't seem to mind. They even joked about how healthy they were being. But as the evening went on, she felt perfectly fine. No symptoms, no discomfort. It was a relief, but it also raised more questions. What was in the food that was making her sick? And why was it only affecting her? She knew she had to find out, but she didn't know how to approach it without causing tension in the family. She didn't want to accuse anyone, but she couldn't keep ignoring the problem. She decided to do some research on her own, hoping to find some answers. Over the next few days, she spent hours online, reading about food allergies, intolerances, and even food poisoning. She made a list of all the ingredients her mother-in-law used and tried to see if any of them could be the culprit. But nothing stood out. She was starting to feel frustrated and a little hopeless. Then, one evening, she had an idea. She remembered that her mother-in-law always used a special spice blend in her cooking. It was a family recipe, passed down through generations. She had never thought much about it before, but now she wondered if that could be the key. She decided to ask her husband about it. When she brought it up, he seemed surprised. He told her the spice blend was a closely guarded secret, and even he didn't know all the ingredients. His mother had always made it herself, and she never let anyone else touch it. This made her even more curious. What was in that spice blend? And could it be the reason she was getting sick? She knew she had to find out, but she didn't know how. She couldn't just ask her mother-in-law for the recipe, that would be too suspicious. And she couldn't sneak a sample without risking getting caught. She was stuck, and she didn't know what to do next. But then, something unexpected happened. Her mother-in-law called and invited them over for dinner again. She said she had a special surprise for them. The woman didn't know what to expect, but she knew she couldn't say no. She agreed to go, but she was nervous. What if the same thing happened again? What if the surprise made things worse? She decided to prepare herself as best as she could. She brought her own food, just in case, and she made sure to eat a light meal before they left. She didn't know what the evening would bring, but she was determined to get to the bottom of this mystery, no matter what. The evening of the dinner arrived, and the woman felt a mix of curiosity and anxiety as she and her husband drove to his parents' house. She kept replaying the conversation with her mother-in-law in her head. What could the special surprise be? Was it related to the food? Or was it something else entirely? She tried to push her worries aside, telling herself to stay calm and see how the night unfolded. When they arrived, her in-laws greeted them warmly, as always. Her mother-in-law was especially cheerful, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "I've been working on something new," she said with a smile. "I think you're going to love it." The woman forced a smile in return, her stomach churning with unease. She hoped that something new wasn't going to make her sick again. As they sat down at the table, her mother-in-law brought out the dishes one by one. The aroma was intoxicating, and the food looked as delicious as ever. But the woman couldn't shake the feeling of dread. She glanced at her husband, who gave her a reassuring nod. They had agreed to stick to their plan, eat the food they brought and avoid anything that might trigger her symptoms. Her mother-in-law noticed the containers they had brought and raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" she asked, her tone light but curious. The woman quickly explained, "Oh, we've been trying out this new diet. It's nothing serious, just something we thought we'd experiment with." Her mother-in-law nodded, though she looked a little disappointed. "Well, I hope you'll at least try a little bit of what I made. It's a special recipe I've been perfecting." The woman hesitated. She didn't want to offend her mother-in-law, but she also didn't want to risk getting sick again. Her husband came to her rescue. "We'll definitely try a bite or two," he said, giving his mother a warm smile. "But we'll stick to our diet for the most part." His mother seemed satisfied with that and began serving the food. As the meal progressed, the woman carefully picked at the dishes, taking small bites here and there. She kept a close eye on how she felt, waiting for any sign of discomfort. But to her surprise, nothing happened. She felt fine, no dizziness, no nausea, no pain. She exchanged a puzzled glance with her husband, who looked just as confused. After dinner, they all moved to the living room to chat. Her mother-in-law was in high spirits, talking animatedly about the new recipe she had created. "It's a twist on an old family favorite," she said. "I added a few new ingredients to give it a unique flavor." The woman listened intently, her mind racing. Could the new ingredients be the reason she didn't feel sick this time? Or was it just a coincidence? When it was time to leave, her mother-in-law handed her a small container. "I packed some leftovers for you," she said. "In case you change your mind about that diet." The woman thanked her, though she had no intention of eating the food. She was more interested in figuring out what was in it. On the drive home, she and her husband discussed the evening. "I don't get it," she said. "I felt fine tonight, but I've been sick every other time we've eaten there. What's different this time?" Her husband shrugged. "Maybe it's the new recipe. Or maybe it's something else entirely. We need to figure this out." When they got home, the woman took the container of leftovers and placed it in the fridge. She wasn't ready to throw it away just yet. There was something about the food that intrigued her. She decided to do some more research, hoping to find a clue that could explain what was happening. The next day, she spent hours online, reading about food allergies, intolerances, and even rare conditions that could cause her symptoms. She made a list of all the ingredients her mother-in-law typically used and compared them to the new recipe. But nothing stood out. She was starting to feel like she was going in circles. Then, she had an idea. She remembered that her mother-in-law had mentioned adding a few new ingredients to the recipe. Maybe those were the key. She decided to call her mother-in-law and casually ask about the new recipe, hoping to get more information. When she called, her mother-in-law was happy to talk about it. "Oh, it's just a little experiment," she said. "I added some herbs and spices I've never used before. I thought it would give the dish a unique flavor." The woman's heart raced. "What kind of herbs and spices?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Her mother-in-law listed a few, most of which the woman had heard of. But then she mentioned one that stood out, a rare herb that wasn't commonly used in cooking. The woman quickly wrote it down and thanked her mother-in-law before ending the call. She immediately looked up the herb online. What she found shocked her. The herb was known to have medicinal properties, but it could also cause adverse reactions in some people, especially if consumed in large quantities. Symptoms included dizziness, nausea, and stomach pain, exactly what she had been experiencing. She felt a mix of relief and frustration. Relief because she finally had an answer, and frustration because she couldn't believe it had taken her this long to figure it out. But there was still one question lingering in her mind: why had her mother-in-law been using this herb in the first place? She decided to talk to her husband about it. When she explained what she had discovered, he looked stunned. "Are you saying my mom's been making you sick this whole time?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. The woman shook her head. "I don't think she did it on purpose. She probably didn't know it could cause these reactions. But we need to talk to her about it." Her husband agreed, though he was clearly uncomfortable with the idea. "This is going to be awkward," he said. "But you're right. We need to figure this out." The next day, they called her mother-in-law and asked if they could stop by for a quick visit. When they arrived, they sat down in the living room, and the woman took a deep breath before explaining what she had discovered. She tried to be as gentle as possible, not wanting to accuse her mother-in-law of anything. To her surprise, her mother-in-law looked shocked. "I had no idea," she said, her voice filled with guilt. "I thought that herb was harmless. I've been using it for years, and no one's ever had a reaction before." The woman reassured her that she didn't blame her, but she also made it clear that she couldn't eat food containing the herb anymore. Her mother-in-law apologized profusely and promised to stop using the herb in her cooking. "I would never want to hurt you," she said, her eyes filled with sincerity. "I'm so sorry this happened." The woman felt a wave of relief. She was glad they had finally gotten to the bottom of the mystery, and she was touched by her mother-in-law's reaction. As they left the house, she felt a sense of closure. The mystery was solved, and she could finally move on. But as she thought about everything that had happened, she couldn't help but feel a little sad. She had spent so much time worrying and feeling sick, and it had all been because of a simple misunderstanding. Still, she was grateful for the support of her husband and the kindness of her in-laws. They had worked through the problem together, and it had brought them closer as a family. She knew that from now on, they would be more careful about what they ate, and more open about communicating their concerns. With the mystery seemingly solved, the woman felt a sense of relief she hadn't experienced in months. She no longer had to dread family dinners or worry about feeling sick afterward. Her mother-in-law had been genuinely apologetic and had even offered to cook her separate meals without the problematic herb. The woman appreciated the effort, but she also felt a little guilty for causing such a fuss. Still, she reminded herself that her health was important, and it was better to address the issue than to keep suffering in silence. Over the next few weeks, things returned to normal. Family dinners became enjoyable again, and the woman felt more at ease around her in-laws. She even started to look forward to their visits, knowing she could eat without fear. Her relationship with her mother-in-law improved too. They spent more time together, chatting and bonding over shared interests. It felt like a fresh start, and the woman was grateful for it. But just as she began to relax, something unexpected happened. One evening, after a particularly hearty meal at her in-laws' house, she started feeling unwell again. At first, she thought it was just a coincidence. Maybe she had eaten too much or had a stressful day at work. But as the symptoms worsened, dizziness, nausea, and a sharp pain in her stomach, she couldn't ignore the possibility that something was still wrong. She tried to stay calm, not wanting to jump to conclusions. After all, her mother-in-law had promised to stop using the herb. Could she have accidentally added it to the dish? Or was there something else going on? The woman didn't want to accuse anyone, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the problem wasn't completely resolved. When she got home, she decided to talk to her husband about it. He was just as confused as she was. "I thought we figured this out," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Why are you feeling sick again?" The woman shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe it's something else in the food. Or maybe it's not the food at all. I just don't understand." They decided to keep an eye on the situation and see if it happened again. Over the next few weeks, the woman paid close attention to how she felt after every meal, whether at home or at her in-laws' house. To her frustration, the symptoms only occurred after eating at her in-laws. It was as if the problem had returned, even though they thought they had solved it. Feeling stuck, the woman decided to seek professional help. She made an appointment with a specialist, hoping to get some answers. The doctor listened carefully to her story and ran a series of tests. When the results came back, they revealed something surprising. She had developed a sensitivity to a specific ingredient commonly used in her mother-in-law's cooking. It wasn't the rare herb after all, it was something much more common. The woman was stunned. All this time, she had been focusing on the wrong thing. The herb had been a red herring, and the real culprit was something she had never suspected. She felt a mix of relief and frustration. Relief because she finally had a clear answer, and frustration because it had taken so long to figure it out. She shared the news with her husband, who was equally surprised. "So it wasn't the herb?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, it's something else entirely. But at least now we know what it is." They decided to talk to her mother-in-law again, this time with the new information. When they explained the situation, her mother-in-law was understanding. "I'm so sorry you've been going through this," she said. "I had no idea. But now that we know, we can make sure to avoid that ingredient." The woman felt a wave of gratitude. Her mother-in-law's willingness to accommodate her needs meant a lot, and it strengthened their bond even further. With the new information, they made some changes to the family meals. Her mother-in-law adjusted her recipes, and the woman started bringing her own dishes just to be safe. Over time, the symptoms disappeared completely, and she was able to enjoy family dinners without any worries. But the experience left a lasting impact on her. It made her realize how important it was to listen to her body and advocate for her health, even when it felt uncomfortable. It also taught her the value of open communication and the importance of working together as a family to solve problems. As life returned to normal, the woman found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. It had been a challenging journey, but it had also brought her closer to her husband and his family. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for their support and understanding, and she knew that they would always have her back, no matter what. With the newfound understanding of her sensitivity to the specific ingredient, the woman felt a renewed sense of control over her health. She began to research the ingredient in depth, learning about its uses, its effects on the body, and how to avoid it in everyday meals. She even started experimenting with new recipes at home, creating dishes that were safe for her to eat and delicious enough to share with her husband. It became a fun project for them, and they enjoyed cooking together more than ever. Her mother-in-law, too, embraced the challenge of adjusting her cooking. She was determined to make sure her daughter-in-law felt included and safe during family meals. She even asked for the woman's help in modifying some of her traditional recipes, which brought them closer together. The woman was touched by her mother-in-law's efforts and felt a deeper connection to her as they worked side by side in the kitchen. For a while, everything seemed perfect. Family dinners were enjoyable again, and the woman no longer felt like an outsider at the table. She was grateful for the support of her husband and in-laws, and she felt like they had truly overcome the challenges together. But life, as it often does, had another twist in store. The following morning, she called her mother-in-law and explained the situation. Her mother-in-law was shocked. "I double-checked all the ingredients," she said. "I made sure everything was safe for you. I can't believe there might have been a mistake." The woman reassured her that she hadn't felt sick, but she also emphasized how important it was to be absolutely certain about the ingredients. Her mother-in-law agreed and promised to be more careful in the future. "I don't want you to ever feel unsafe in our home," she said. "I'll make sure this doesn't happen again." The woman appreciated the sentiment but couldn't help feeling a little frustrated. It seemed like no matter how hard they tried, there was always room for error. Over the next few weeks, the woman became more vigilant about what she ate, not just at her in-laws' house but everywhere. She started reading food labels more carefully and asking detailed questions at restaurants. She even began carrying a small card with her that listed the ingredients she needed to avoid, just in case. Her husband noticed the change and tried to reassure her. "You're doing everything you can," he said. "You can't control everything, but you're being smart about it." The woman knew he was right, but she couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. She had worked so hard to overcome the problem, and now it felt like it was creeping back into her life. One day, while browsing online, she came across a support group for people with food sensitivities. She joined the group and found comfort in talking to others who understood what she was going through. They shared tips, recipes, and stories of their own struggles, and the woman realized she wasn't alone. It gave her a sense of community and helped her feel more empowered. With the support of her husband, her in-laws, and her new online friends, the woman began to feel more confident again. She knew there would always be challenges, but she also knew she had the tools and the support system to handle them. She was determined not to let her sensitivity control her life. As time went on, she found a new balance. She continued to be cautious, but she also allowed herself to enjoy food and family gatherings without constant worry. She even started experimenting with new recipes again, creating dishes that were safe for her and delicious for everyone. It became a way for her to take control of her situation and turn it into something positive. Looking back, she realized how much she had grown through the experience. It had been difficult and frustrating at times, but it had also taught her important lessons about health, communication, and resilience. She felt stronger and more capable than ever, and she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she could face them with confidence. Life settled into a new rhythm for the woman. She had learned to navigate her food sensitivity with care, and her relationship with her in-laws had grown stronger through their shared efforts to accommodate her needs. Family dinners became a source of joy again, and she felt more confident in her ability to handle any challenges that came her way. But just as she began to feel like she had everything under control, an unexpected event shook her newfound sense of stability. One afternoon, she received a call from her mother-in-law. The tone of her voice was different, hesitant, almost nervous. "I need to talk to you about something," her mother-in-law said. "Can you come over?" The woman agreed, though she couldn't help feeling a little anxious. What could be so important that it couldn't be discussed over the phone? When she arrived at her in-laws' house, her mother-in-law greeted her with a warm but strained smile. They sat down in the living room, and after a moment of silence, her mother-in-law began to speak. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said. "And I realized there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." The woman's heart raced. What could her mother-in-law possibly be about to reveal? She tried to stay calm, but her mind was flooded with possibilities. Was it about the food? Was there something else she hadn't been told? She nodded, encouraging her mother-in-law to continue. Her mother-in-law took a deep breath. "You know how we've been so careful about the ingredients in our cooking since we found out about your sensitivity," she said. "Well, there's a reason I've been so determined to make sure you're safe. It's because I've been through something similar." The woman was stunned. She had never heard her mother-in-law mention anything about food sensitivities or health issues. "What do you mean?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Her mother-in-law explained that years ago, she had struggled with her own health problems related to food. She had experienced similar symptoms, dizziness, nausea, stomach pain, but at the time, she hadn't understood what was causing them. It wasn't until much later that she discovered she had a sensitivity to a specific ingredient, one that was common in many of the dishes she had grown up eating. "It was a difficult time for me," her mother-in-law said. "I felt like I was losing a part of myself, like I couldn't enjoy the things I loved anymore. It took me a long time to come to terms with it and make the necessary changes. When I saw you going through something similar, it brought back a lot of memories. I wanted to help you, but I also didn't want to burden you with my story." The woman listened in silence, her mind reeling. She had no idea her mother-in-law had gone through something so similar. It explained why she had been so understanding and willing to make changes in her cooking. But it also made her wonder why her mother-in-law had kept it a secret for so long. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked gently. Her mother-in-law sighed. "I guess I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that it would make things more complicated, or that you would think I was trying to make it about me. But now I realize that keeping it to myself wasn't fair to you. You deserve to know that you weren't alone in this." The woman felt a wave of empathy. She understood the fear of being vulnerable, of sharing something so personal. But she also felt a deep sense of gratitude. Her mother-in-law's honesty brought them even closer, and it gave her a new perspective on their shared journey. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "It means a lot to know that you understand what I've been going through. And I'm sorry you had to go through it too." Her mother-in-law smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "We're in this together," she said. "And I'm here for you, no matter what." The conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. They began to talk more openly about their experiences, sharing tips and advice on managing their sensitivities. The woman even started to see her mother-in-law as a source of inspiration, someone who had faced similar challenges and come out stronger on the other side. But the revelation also sparked a new curiosity in the woman. If her mother-in-law had a similar sensitivity, could it be something that ran in the family? She decided to do some research, looking into whether food sensitivities could be hereditary. What she found surprised her. According to some studies, there was evidence to suggest that food sensitivities and allergies could have a genetic component. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was possible that her sensitivity was inherited. The idea fascinated her, and she began to wonder if other members of her husband's family had experienced similar issues. She decided to bring it up with her husband. "Do you think anyone else in your family might have food sensitivities?" she asked one evening. He thought for a moment. "I'm not sure," he said. "But it's possible. We've never really talked about it." The woman suggested they ask around, just to see if anyone else had similar experiences. Over the next few weeks, they reached out to various family members, asking if they had ever dealt with food-related health issues. To their surprise, several relatives shared stories of their own struggles. Some had sensitivities to specific ingredients, while others had dealt with more severe allergies. It seemed that the woman's experience was just one piece of a larger puzzle. The discovery brought the family closer together. They began to share recipes, tips, and advice, creating a network of support for those dealing with food sensitivities. The woman felt a sense of pride in helping to bring these issues to light, and she was grateful for the opportunity to connect with her extended family in a new way. But the journey wasn't over yet. As she continued to learn more about her sensitivity and its possible genetic roots, she began to think about the future. What if she and her husband decided to have children someday? Would they inherit her sensitivity? It was a question she didn't have an answer to, but it was one she knew she needed to explore. She decided to consult a specialist, someone who could provide more information about the hereditary aspects of food sensitivities. The appointment was eye-opening. The specialist explained that while there was a genetic component, it wasn't a guarantee that her children would inherit her sensitivity. There were also steps she could take to reduce the risk, such as introducing potential allergens early and monitoring their reactions. The woman left the appointment feeling more informed and empowered. She knew there were no easy answers, but she also knew she had the tools and the support system to handle whatever challenges came her way. She felt a renewed sense of hope for the future, knowing that she was taking control of her health and her family's well-being. As she reflected on everything that had happened, she realized how far she had come. What had started as a frustrating and isolating experience had turned into a journey of discovery, connection, and growth. She had learned to advocate for herself, to lean on her loved ones, and to find strength in vulnerability. And she knew that no matter what the future held, she was ready to face it with confidence. The woman's journey of understanding her food sensitivity had taken her to places she never expected. From the initial confusion and frustration to the surprising connection with her mother-in-law, she had grown stronger and more confident in navigating her health. But as she continued to explore the hereditary aspects of her condition, she began to think about the bigger picture, not just for herself, but for her family's future. One evening, as she and her husband sat down to dinner, she brought up the topic that had been on her mind. "What if we decide to have kids someday?" she asked. "Do you think they'll have the same sensitivity I do?" Her husband paused, considering the question. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But even if they do, we'll figure it out together. Just like we've done with everything else." His words reassured her, but she couldn't shake the feeling of responsibility. She wanted to be as prepared as possible, not just for her own sake, but for the sake of her future children. She decided to take a proactive approach, diving deeper into research and consulting with specialists to better understand the risks and how to manage them. One of the specialists she spoke to suggested keeping a detailed family health history. This would help identify any patterns or potential risks that could be passed down. The woman thought this was a great idea and decided to create a comprehensive record, not just for her own family but for her husband's as well. She reached out to relatives on both sides, asking about their health histories and any known food sensitivities or allergies. The process was eye-opening. She discovered that her own family had a history of mild food intolerances, while her husband's family had more pronounced sensitivities, like hers. This confirmed her suspicion that her condition might have a genetic component. But it also gave her a sense of clarity. Knowing the risks allowed her to take steps to mitigate them, whether through dietary adjustments, early testing, or other preventive measures. As she compiled the information, she shared it with her husband and in-laws. They were all supportive and appreciative of her efforts. Her mother-in-law, in particular, was impressed. "This is such a valuable resource," she said. "Not just for us, but for future generations. You're doing something really important." The woman felt a sense of pride in her work, knowing it could benefit her family for years to come. But the project also brought up unexpected emotions. As she learned more about her family's health history, she began to reflect on her own upbringing. She realized that her parents had never talked much about health issues, and she wondered if they had faced similar challenges without realizing it. She decided to call her mother and ask. The conversation was enlightening. Her mother admitted that she had experienced occasional digestive issues over the years but had never connected them to food. "We just didn't think about it back then," her mother said. "If something made you feel bad, you avoided it, but we didn't have the resources or knowledge to figure out why." The woman felt a pang of sadness for her mother, realizing how much easier it was now to access information and support. She shared her findings with her mother, who was fascinated and grateful. "I wish I had known this sooner," her mother said. "But I'm glad you're taking care of yourself and looking out for your future family." The woman felt a deep sense of connection to her mother, knowing they were both part of a larger story that spanned generations. With her family health history complete, the woman felt more prepared than ever. She knew there were no guarantees, but she also knew she had done everything she could to understand and manage the risks. She felt a renewed sense of hope and determination, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. But life had one more surprise in store. One day, while organizing some old family photos, she came across a recipe book that had belonged to her grandmother. The woman's blog quickly became a source of inspiration for many people dealing with food sensitivities and allergies. She shared not only her personal story but also practical tips, recipes, and resources that she had gathered over the years. The positive feedback she received motivated her to keep going, and she found herself spending more and more time on the project. It was fulfilling work, and she felt like she was making a real difference. But as her blog grew, so did the demands on her time. Balancing her job, her family, and her newfound passion for helping others became a challenge. She often found herself staying up late to write posts or respond to comments, and the stress began to take a toll on her health. One evening, after a particularly long day, she felt the familiar symptoms creeping back: dizziness, nausea, and a sharp pain in her stomach. At first, she tried to ignore it, chalking it up to exhaustion. But when the symptoms persisted, she knew she had to take a step back. She talked to her husband about it, and he encouraged her to slow down. "You're doing amazing work," he said. "But you can't help others if you're not taking care of yourself." She knew he was right, but it was hard to let go of something that had become such a big part of her life. She decided to take a break from the blog for a few weeks to focus on her health. It wasn't an easy decision, but she knew it was necessary. During that time, she reconnected with the simple joys of life, spending time with her husband, cooking meals together, and enjoying quiet evenings at home. She also took the opportunity to reflect on her journey and what she wanted for the future. One day, while flipping through her grandmother's old recipe book, she had an idea. What if she turned the blog into something more? Something that could reach even more people and provide even greater support? She thought about creating a community, a place where people could share their stories, ask questions, and find resources all in one place. It would be a bigger project, but it felt like the natural next step. Excited by the idea, she shared it with her husband. He was supportive but also cautious. "It sounds amazing," he said. "But it's going to be a lot of work. Are you sure you're ready for that?" She thought about it for a moment and then nodded. "I think it's worth it," she said. "And this time, I'll make sure to take care of myself too." With her husband's support, she began to plan the next phase of her project. She reached out to some of the people she had connected with through her blog, asking if they would be interested in contributing to the new community. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and soon she had a team of passionate individuals ready to help bring her vision to life. The process of building the community was challenging but rewarding. They worked together to create a website, develop resources, and plan events. The woman took on a leadership role, but she made sure to delegate tasks and set boundaries to avoid burning out again. It was a learning experience, but she felt more in control this time, knowing she had the support of her team and her family. When the community finally launched, it was a huge success. People from all over the world joined, sharing their stories, offering support, and finding comfort in knowing they weren't alone. The woman felt a deep sense of pride and fulfillment, knowing she had created something that could make a real difference in people's lives. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. As the community grew, so did the responsibility of managing it. There were disagreements, technical issues, and moments of doubt. But through it all, the woman remained committed to her vision. She leaned on her team, her family, and the lessons she had learned along the way to navigate the ups and downs. One of the most rewarding aspects of the community was the connections it fostered. People who had once felt isolated and now had a place to turn for support and understanding. The woman loved reading the stories and seeing the impact the community was having. It reminded her why she had started this journey in the first place and gave her the motivation to keep going. As time went on, the community became more than just a resource, it became a movement. They organized events, partnered with organizations, and even lobbied for better awareness and accommodations for people with food sensitivities. The woman found herself speaking at conferences, sharing her story, and advocating for change. It was a role she had never imagined for herself, but it felt like the natural next step in her journey. Through it all, she never lost sight of what mattered most: her health, her family, and her commitment to helping others. She continued to take care of herself, setting boundaries and making time for the things that brought her joy. And she remained grateful for the support of her husband, her in-laws, and the community she had built. Looking back, she realized how far she had come. What had started as a personal struggle had turned into a powerful force for good. She had faced challenges, made mistakes, and learned valuable lessons along the way. But through it all, she had grown stronger, more resilient, and more determined to make a difference. As she stood on stage at a conference, looking out at the audience, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She was no longer just a woman with a food sensitivity, she was a leader, an advocate, and a source of hope for others. And she knew that no matter what the future held, she was ready to face it with confidence and courage. The woman's journey had come full circle. What had begun as a personal struggle with food sensitivities had blossomed into a thriving community and a movement for change. She had found her purpose in helping others, and it had given her a sense of fulfillment she had never imagined. But as she stood on the stage at the conference, looking out at the sea of faces, she realized that her story was far from over. There was still so much to do, so many people to reach, and so many lives to touch. After the conference, she returned home with a renewed sense of energy and determination. She knew that the work she was doing was important, but she also knew that she couldn't do it alone. She leaned on her team, her family, and the community she had built to keep moving forward. Together, they continued to grow the platform, adding new resources, hosting events, and advocating for greater awareness and understanding of food sensitivities. One of the most impactful initiatives they launched was a campaign to educate schools and workplaces about food sensitivities. They created guides, hosted workshops, and even developed training programs to help people understand how to create safe and inclusive environments. The woman was particularly passionate about this project, knowing how much it could change lives. She remembered how isolating it had felt to navigate her own sensitivity, and she was determined to make things easier for others. The campaign was a huge success. Schools and workplaces across the country began to adopt their recommendations, and the woman received countless messages from people thanking her for making a difference. One message, in particular, stood out to her. It was from a mother whose child had struggled with food sensitivities for years. "Because of your work," the mother wrote, "my child finally feels understood and supported at school. Thank you for giving us hope." Reading those words brought tears to the woman's eyes. It was moments like these that reminded her why she had started this journey in the first place. She wasn't just helping people manage their sensitivities, she was giving them a sense of belonging and empowerment. And that, she realized, was the most important thing of all. As the community continued to grow, the woman began to think about the future. She knew that she couldn't do this forever, and she wanted to make sure that the work would continue even after she stepped back. She started mentoring others, teaching them how to lead and manage the platform. She also began to explore ways to make the community self-sustaining, ensuring that it would thrive for years to come. Her husband was her biggest supporter through it all. He had been by her side every step of the way, cheering her on and helping her navigate the challenges. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, he turned to her and said, "I'm so proud of you. You've done something incredible, and you've changed so many lives." She smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. "You've been my rock through all of this." Her in-laws, too, were incredibly proud of her. Her mother-in-law, in particular, had become one of her biggest advocates. She often shared the woman's story with her friends and even helped out with some of the community events. The bond between them had grown stronger than ever, and the woman felt a deep sense of connection to her extended family. But as much as she loved the work she was doing, the woman knew that she needed to find balance. She had learned the hard way that she couldn't pour from an empty cup, and she was determined to take care of herself as much as she took care of others. She started setting clearer boundaries, making time for the things that brought her joy, and prioritizing her health. One of the things she loved most was cooking. It had become a creative outlet for her, a way to experiment with new recipes and share them with others. She even started a cooking series on the community platform, showing people how to make delicious, sensitivity-friendly meals. It was a hit, and she loved seeing the comments and photos from people who had tried her recipes. As she continued to find balance, the woman began to think about the next chapter of her life. She and her husband had started talking about starting a family, and she felt excited about the possibility. She knew that it would bring new challenges, but she also knew that she was ready. She had faced so much already, and she felt confident in her ability to handle whatever came her way. One day, as she was flipping through her grandmother's old recipe book, she had an idea. She decided to create a new recipe, one that combined her grandmother's traditional flavors with her own modern twist. It was a way to honor her past while looking toward the future. When she shared the recipe on the community platform, it quickly became one of the most popular posts. People loved the story behind it, and many shared their own family recipes in the comments. The woman felt a deep sense of connection to her roots and to the community she had built. She realized that her journey had never been just about her, it was about the people who had come before her and the ones who would come after. It was about creating a legacy of understanding, compassion, and resilience. As she looked back on everything she had been through, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. The challenges she had faced had shaped her into the person she was today, strong, compassionate, and determined to make a difference. She knew that there would always be obstacles to overcome, but she also knew that she had the tools and the support system to face them head-on. And so, as she stood on the threshold of a new chapter, the woman felt ready. Ready to continue her work, ready to start a family, and ready to embrace whatever the future held. She knew that her journey was far from over, but she also knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be.